Hey listeners, I'd like to start off the episode with a little story of how I met our next guest. I recently experienced something that forced me to confront my self-worth and my purpose. I found myself dealing with patterns of self-destruction and self-sabotage, which I realized stemmed from traumatic events in my childhood, events I had been avoiding for years. Despite years of therapy, it wasn't until recently that I truly confronted this pain. It led me to a dark place, but everything changed when I met Hylan. Her incredible story of resilience illuminated my path, reminding me that even in the darkest tunnels, there's always light at the end. Join us as Hylan shares her journey, hoping to inspire others who may be facing similar struggles.
So Hylan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So for our listeners, can you give me a brief intro of your personal background?
Sure. So I'm Hylan. I'm a 37-year-old female. I've had a long, pretty successful career in tech. I've worked at Google. I've lived in Hawaii for 2 years, and I ran over 20 half marathons and 6 full marathons. And surprisingly, I recently did up biological age, and I am actually 22 in biological age. But there's a backstory to how I got here. And so I want to share that in this podcast. And so just a summary is that I've had a pretty rough childhood. It's ridden with poverty, abuse, trauma, codependency. And in 2021, I actually lost both my parents due to illness. And then, now I'm here, and I think my story is about just defying expectations in terms of someone coming from a childhood of abuse and trauma, and then, just kind of overcoming all the adversities and transforming pain to power. So I'm here to share that and hope to inspire others to, find light within their darkness.
Well, thank you for, sharing this, because it's a lot. It's a lot and it's very personal, and we just want to thank you for coming on to, kind of tell us your story. Mm-hmm. So what was the defining moment or experience that made you realize you needed to address your trauma?
Yeah, so I actually want to provide a little bit of background to the trauma, right? Because every trauma story has a background of the people who, I guess, provided the environment with trauma, and then how the trauma happened. And so just kind of a little background about my story and my journey. So I immigrated here when I was 6. I came from 2 parents who did their best. My dad was part of the Vietnam War. So he actually fought in the war, and then my mom survived through the Vietnam War with him, right? So they have that background of poverty, struggle. And then my dad served in a re-education camp. He was super strict, came from a military background, right? They lost the war. They were super wealthy before the war, and then all their wealth got basically taken away. And they have no ability to basically retain their jobs and their career before the war. And so they have to kind of make ends meet by finding other ways to work and, sustain us. So I came from a background of just complete poverty, which is basically like living less than $1 a day. So that was my childhood. And then we immigrated here when I was 6. We had basically zero money, right? If you live off of, less than $1 a day, you come here, you basically have nothing.
Yeah.
And so my parents basically came here to build a better future for us. But unfortunately, my parents, divorced when I was about 8. And I think after the divorce, that's when the abuse with a family member of mine happened. And it happened all the way till I was 19. And then, obviously immigration, around that age also requires you to assimilate to the new culture, pick up the new language, adjust. And, on top of that is also overcoming just the differences in terms of where your family is versus all the other families with money, right? And all the other kids, and of course, bullying and things like that at school, which is, I think, is the least of my struggle in this story. But basically the abuse happened between I was 8 and 19. And then when I was 13, my dad was diagnosed with lymphoma. And then he was diagnosed again at 16. And then
when you were 16?
Yeah, when I was 16. And then since my parents divorced, my mom started dating someone when I was 14. And that was a very long, toxic, abusive relationship up until about 2 years before her death, which was when I was about 32.
So was it a toxic relationship between her and her partner?
Yes.
And that was just things that you witnessed?
Daily.
Yeah.
Got it. And you mentioned that your parents were divorced. Did you go between parents or you stayed with one in particular?
So I live with my mom, and my dad I would see almost every weekend. So it actually really helped our relationship because it was like dedicated, uninterrupted, time that we always scheduled with each other every single weekend.
That's a lot to go through.
Yeah.
And again, very personal. So going back to Liza's question, how did you realize because you're living it, how did you realize like how it's affecting you and how you needed to like address it?
Yeah. So during college, I think that it went to a head, right? So I was basically suicidal actually in high school, but when you're so young, you actually don't know like what's wrong, what's right. You just have the feelings, the emotions and thoughts, right? You don't really know like, is this right? Is this
sure?
Like, you know that it's quote unquote bad or like a negative experience, but you just don't know why do you want to live? Why do you want to die? Kind of, reasoning. But when I was about 19, I was in college. That's when my mom, she found out her ex was cheating on her, which I have told her while I was in high school that I heard him on the phone and I believe that he's cheating on her, but she never believed me. So when I left for college, there was no one at the helm to even defend her, right? Because I was partly playing the role of like defending her, standing up for her, and threatening to call the cops if he crossed the line. So when I was 19, things got really bad to the point that she was diagnosed with lupus, and lupus is actually triggered by stress.
Yes.
And so she had a huge flare up. And in this time, she was dealing with this guy cheating on her. And she had this brilliant idea. And I don't know like if he convinced her, but to move to Texas so that the cheating would stop. So this was her solution to the cheating while she had a flare up. And when she just moved to Texas, and I was 19, I was in college. I was still acclimating to college life.
Did you go away to college or were you local?
I went away to college. Okay. So I went to Santa Cruz. It's not super far, but it's still a full like independent college experience, right?
Yep.
And
you were going through depression too. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you're going through this, you realize your mom is like picking up all her things. All your things get thrown away. Yeah. You're at college and you're like, okay, now I have no quote unquote home to go back to, right? Your dorm isn't really a home place.
Yep.
Right. And my dad is sick. He doesn't really have a home either. He just has a small apartment just for himself. And I never lived with him. So she picks up and go to Texas. All my belongings, all my memories, including a lot of my photos, get thrown away. And it was in a hurry of this move. And then she goes there and then she's bedridden.
In Texas.
Yeah. And I get the call.
That she's bedridden.
She's bedridden. She ended up in the hospital. And I was actually contemplating of dropping out of college during this time. And it was so bad. And I think I also was actually in a toxic relationship too. So that toxic relationship, the guy was body shaming me and he was just not a great person. And there were just so many forces that I was just like, oh my God, I need to do something. I need to drop out. I just need to reduce my stress load, right? And I think one day I got just so upset and I didn't know what to do. I told Liza this, but I went for a run. I went for like an angry run.
And that's when she started running.
Yeah, I started running. And so that's kind of why I even talked about my marathons, right? Yeah. Is that, like throughout my childhood, I was actually, because we were in poverty, I was actually a premature baby also, right? And just upbringing was so bad. Like I actually had asthma like for most of my adult like childhood and then like adolescence. And then it was only at 19 when I was so angry, I went for a run and I actually ran like a mile. And that was like the furthest I was able to run up until that time, because during high school, whenever there was PE, it was like,
I have asthma, so I don't expect me to. Yeah, exactly. So that was your excuse.
Yeah, well, I couldn't even run. I wanted to run, but I couldn't run a quarter of a mile. It felt like death. When you have asthma and you try to run a quarter mile, everyone is like able to run a quarter mile. Now I look at quarter mile, I'm like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But before then, it was like, oh my God, it's like, someone just please drag me to the finish line, you know? So at 19, I was able to run a mile. And I remember just thinking, I'm like, oh my God, like, how is this possible? Right. But, and the other end of it was also, oh my God, I feel better.
Yeah. You actually felt the run made you feel better.
Yeah, because it's the endorphins, right? Yep. And then it triggered two things in me. One, the idea of what is reality, right? What are my beliefs that shape my reality? And then the other one is the understanding that your habits, your biology can affect your mental health and also like your outcomes in life, right? So it really triggered that. And then like every week I was like on this high of like, oh my God, like, can I run? Can I do it again? And can I do it a little bit better and a little bit further and a little bit faster? So that's how I got into running. And the more I kind of push those little limits every week, the better I felt. And we have actually a background of mental health issues with our family. So my aunt has been on antidepressants for decades, right? We have schizophrenia in the family. I think there are other undiagnosed people in our family as well. And so I really felt it, right? And when I was actually starting to run, I actually looked up all the mechanics behind running and how it ties into mental health, all the hormones and things like that, because I was feeling a big, big difference. And that's kind of the start of how I started to heal my trauma.
So did you, like, just going back, did you take yourself out of college, or did you?
No.
Like, what did you do?
So actually the run actually was the one thing that helped me excel at my schoolwork and everything. I started to notice that I was getting better in terms of managing my anxiety. And then that helped me with my schoolwork and managing stress overall. And I wasn't so burdened by the stressors in my life with my mom and things like that. I just had a better way to manage everything. And I also, like picked up a lot of philosophy when it comes to running. Is when I did these run, it was like an emotional dump in some ways, right? And
it totally is for me too. Yeah, for sure.
And I would run at night and I would just run. And Santa Cruz is super beautiful. And we have a beautiful track. And so I would use that time to kind of like do a moving meditation. At that time, I didn't know what meditation was, but it is now looking back, it is a form of meditation for me. And when you run too, right? There are days that you don't feel great. There are days that you can't run as long as other days, but I just always look at my feet and I'm like, it's just one step before the other, right? And I apply that to a lot of other areas of my life too, is you just have to just put one step in front of the other and then things will work out.
Yeah. So Hylan, when was the defining moment for you when you realized like, shit, like I am the way that I am because of my trauma? Or when did you realize you had childhood trauma that took you, to where you were at when you were going through depression? And
yeah, I didn't delve into the psychology part until I think I was in my second job out of college, was just at a tech company, and I was doing really well at in my career. Like,
so I want to pause there first because I'm still trying to, like, I'm just imagining. So I have a daughter; she's 17 years old.
Yeah.
So I am fully aware that there is this balancing act that she has to do. She has to feel a little bit of stress in her life in order for her to be able to grow and be successful and hopefully be a contributing person to society and be independent. Ultimately, right. I want her to be able to be independent.
Yeah.
But I'm also very worried because our world is so full of not so great things, right? So as a mother, you really want to, I just want to protect her, but I don't want to protect her too much. So I'm in awe of just your story, because having to deal with all of that and then being in college and trying to figure out, you were strong enough to not give up on you. So that's what I want to understand, like what?
Yeah,
like,
that's a good question.
Okay,
like,
well,
why didn't you give up on you? Because it's like so easy to do, right?
Well, the biggest thing is, like I said, I think everything that I think is our pain can be used as motivation. I mentioned our poverty background, right? So for me, it was, I either go back to that or I move forward. So if I didn't finish college, what options in terms of career would I have, right? And then also, even though my parents had their struggles, they always actually valued intellect, right? My dad was the principal before the war, and then my mom was a teacher. So they taught me at the very young age to always develop my mind, my knowledge. And when my mom actually divorced my dad, she was quite bitter, but she did have some really great wisdom to instill in me. And one of those wisdom was that, you know, in life, anything can be taken away from you, right? You can lose a lot of different things, right? You can lose your house, your car, money. But if you develop your knowledge, your mind, your mental strength, right? Your character, no one can take that away from you. No matter what happens, you can always rebuild.
And that stuck with you.
Yeah, because she repeated that actually like quite a lot, you know, despite all the negative stuff. And this was how she was before she entered that really toxic relationship. I had really great relationships with my parents before, you know, things kind of went, you know, awry, right? So they did instill great values in me despite their struggles as, you know, people who had relationship difficulties and things like that. And I remember, like I said, it was a combination of having those values. Also, just, I always tell myself, I do not ever want to be back to where I started, you know? So no matter what happens, I'm never going to start back at square one.
So that was the force within you that just says, I'm not going to give up.
I think because I also had great relationships with my parents, and this is also where the codependency comes in, right? And maybe the good side of codependency is like, I always dreamt up that I would be able to provide a better future for my parents. And if I didn't get a college degree, that would not be very easy for me.
Do. Yep.
The one thing that I do love about Hylan so much is that I have codependency issues too that I didn't even realize till, you know, recently, is that when you're codependent, you give so much of yourself to others and nothing to yourself. And now she's at this point where it's all about her. She's like, fuck everyone else. She drops her, like, people that she doesn't need in her life like flies. And I can't do that. But I do like love and respect that so much. So Hylan, like, how did you come to that point where you're like, it's me. This is about me now, you know?
Yeah, so I think for most of my life, I've been pretty codependent, right? And it started little, right? This is how it.
Well, because you took care of your parents pretty much since you were a child.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. So my parents, like I mentioned, like, you know, my dad had cancer when I was 13 and then 16, and then my mom had lupus since she was 19. There's no cure for lupus. Yeah. After cancer, also, my dad was basically legally disabled. He just didn't have the energy or just the ability to really do anything. He couldn't even drive. So, like I said, it kind of falls back on me. But because I had great relationships with them, I also wanted to take care of them, right? And that's kind of how codependency starts, is that you're put in the place of being the caretaker. And with me, the people that were supposed to be my caretaker couldn't take care of me. So that's what creates the codependency trauma. And that pattern, even though it stemmed from a really good place of care and love, it kind of went out of control when it came to other parts of my life, right? when it comes to choosing romantic partners, choosing friends, work, for instance. So it's this imbalance of taking on more than you really have to, and also more than is actually healthy for you, like mentally, psychologically, like emotionally, and physically, right? And I would notice I would put myself in a lot of pain. And when you're codependent and with trauma, other parts of trauma like abuse, you have such a huge tolerance for pain, right? And that is part of also like...
And this is emotional pain. Yeah.
Well, emotional and sometimes physical pain too, right? And because all pain culminates into physical pain in some ways or another. And also abuse comes in physical abuse as well, right? And with my past of physical abuse, I have actual tolerance for physical pain.
Yeah.
When you have a break in abuse, that's when you start to find your own peace. And that's when, contrast to being with someone who is abusive, you start to notice that I don't really feel good, right? Even if you don't know why, or like why it's like the conflicting feelings around it, you just know that I don't like this treatment. I don't like.
So you actually starting to recognize like you knew it was wrong, but now you're consciously acknowledging I don't like this.
Yep. And I was starting to kind of build my confidence, especially actually when I started to go into work, right? So when after college, I entered the workforce, and, you know, when you have abuse and someone like physically, mentally, emotionally abuse you, your confidence diminished quite a bit. I was like on the emotional side, it was like criticizing everything from how I look, how I sound, my facial features, my height, everything, right? And so I had quite low self-esteem. But then when I entered the workforce and I'm just trying to be, you know, authentic and, you know, say, you know, report things and everything I'm doing and things like that, I think there's a light in me that other people at work saw. And I got actually, I said, I did really well at work. I got recognition. I got like awards and things like that. And
so that helped with your confidence, right?
And I actually built like friendships at work too, right? And those friendships, because they're new and they're adult friendships, right? They would compliment me, right? Oh, like, you know, they compliment me how I present myself at work, how I dress, how, you know, like, and sometimes how I look too, right? And that gave me a really big contrast to compare to what was communicated with me at home.
So two different environments. And I think, again, you were starting to get on this journey, right, of your trauma, because, again, you were talking about your high of running, and it sounded like you continue to run with your 20 plus marathons.
Excuse me.
So I mean, this was basically, you were in a completely different environment.
Yeah, work takes up 40 hours a week at least, right? And I was starting to see that. I'm like, wow, people actually like believe that I'm attractive. I was just like floored, because I was told all of my life I was unattractive. I'm too short, my nose too big, you know, everything, you know, like my thighs are too big, you know, everything. Even though I think most of the time I've been in pretty healthy weight, and it was just a lot of that. And like, you know, I was just criticized for everything in terms of my communication too, that, oh, the things I say don't make sense, everything. So imagine if you go into the world and you think that you're unattractive, you know, and if people look at you, it's embarrassing. It's because you're embarrassing and that you don't make sense. Imagine like you don't believe that you have anything to give, right? And then I would actually have these conversations. My coworkers, sometimes they would give me these compliments, and I was just like, "Are you sure? I was told this though. Like I was told that no, like men don't like short women. Like short is unattractive. Like that's what I was told." And one of my coworkers like no, you're wrong.
Yeah.
You know, because you have these small talks with your coworkers. They become friends, and you talk about dating and things like that. And they're like, no, men love short women. You know,
well, because you were just kind of, it was embedded in your mind that through your life that it's not.
So through this, like as you're bringing us along to your journey, at what point were you starting to kill yourself?
So actually, I had thoughts of suicide during high school, right? That kind of subsided because I was so busy with college and also everything with my parents and my parents' health. And it really made me preoccupied, just finish college, just survive, make rent, buy your books, just I have no time to even think about suicide anymore, right? Because it was just go, 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 go. Every time that I had in life was occupied by schoolwork, work, my parents, or just I don't know what, chores and whatever, right? So I didn't really have any time. And I thought, like I said, I was driven by the fact that, okay, I have to make it. I have to make it. I have to get out of poverty, right? I can't struggle anymore. I'm done struggling. And so when I entered the workforce, I was starting to kind of do really well. I got recognized, got raises, and then, it provided kind of a high for me a little bit. And then I also got into my first long relationship. And I remember after that relationship ended, after I got the promotion and the raises, I just kind of felt flat. And I remember just thinking I'm not struggling anymore. Financially, I have my own place. I had roommates at the time, but still it's my own nice place. Mm-hmm. And I'm not struggling money wise. Things are pretty good. Mm-hmm. I don't have those same things that I thought would, was holding me down. And I thought if I'd be here, I'd be happy.
And you weren't.
No.
So that means that you had to address other things.
Yeah, that's when the mental health stuff really kicked in. And I started actually reading. So I was pretty disciplined, right? And it came with the fact that I was disciplined when it came to running. So I kind of applied the same framework when it came to building other habits. And so, like I said, my goal in life was always I'm going to be rich. Yeah. I'm never going to be rich, never going to be poor again. So I always kind of was okay, Hylan, you got to learn how to be rich, right? What do rich people do? Mm-hmm. They read a lot, they exercise, which I'm already doing. And I would look up other lists, right? What are the habits? What are these rich people doing?
Rich people habits, yes.
Right. And I would go actually all these checklists, compile them, see the commonalities, right? And just identify and go down this list. Mm-hmm. I would routinely go through this list and am I practicing these every day, monthly, daily? What is it? And there are two things that I had trouble developing, and that was reading and meditation. I didn't know what the heck meditation was. And I also was how am I going to read? I hate reading. It takes so much time. But I figured it out. So when I actually did start reading, I started actually, so growing up, I really hated reading, just absolutely hated it. But I realized it was because I was forced to read books that didn't interest me. And so I started to identify the genres that actually I was able to read. And I stopped actually forcing myself to pick up books that were bestsellers that people say are good, but aren't up my alley. So during even that phase too, I realized I'm I need to honor myself and my interests, right? And I need to be able to just finish one book, right? And the books that I really liked reading and that I would always finish would be business books, mental health books, and philosophy and spirituality books. I didn't really get into spirituality until actually started meditating. And like I said, I was really good at discipline. And I was telling my roommate at the time, I was I'm trying to pick up these habits. And one of them is mindfulness and meditation. And she's Indian. She has, and she practices meditation quite frequently, and it's part of her culture. And she, follows this guru. who is actually pretty popular, and she volunteers for him and things like that. And she's like, oh, I have a meditation CD if you want to try it. I picked up that meditation CD and I did it every single night until I was able to do it on my own. And I think those two things, reading and meditation, was what really actually propelled me to really understand myself on a deeper level and get the knowledge necessary and understand how to get the knowledge, right? The right knowledge from experts to then apply that to my life. And, you know, that spans across the board, everything from finance, business, leadership, mental health, relationships, and, you know, just about anything that I want to learn.
So now that you're in this place, like, do you find yourself like, you know what, I'm in a place of my journey, I'm at peace, or are you still getting to peace?
Do you feel like you're ever 100% healed from trauma is my question.
So I think the phrasing of that question is interesting.
Yeah.
And I would like to reframe it.
Okay.
So I believe that we are not damaged, right? And I feel that saying about like healing and are we ever healed kind of implies that we are somewhat damaged, or, you know, and we need to heal from that. And how I like to think about it is that we're whole, you know, we're like a plant, right? Imagine like a bonsai tree. It has wires to kind of shape its shape. At some point, and the bonsai tree takes this shape of whatever you want it to like look, right? And what trauma is those wires, right? And when you look at the tree though, it doesn't look damaged, right? It still grows and flourishes, right? But it's just, I think at this point, I kind of see myself as taking off those wires, right? Taking off those wires and just growing how I'm supposed to grow without restrictions, you know? So, and I believe that we're kind of like an onion, right? It's just peeling back the layers, and all these life events are just experiences for you to better understand yourself. And also in some ways, I believe that trauma, pain, and these adversities are in some ways gifts for you to unlock the light and the power of it on the other side, right? Because without all the challenges, right, I wouldn't be able to develop all these great things about
They're
myself.
blessings in disguise.
Yeah,
really.
but that's the thing, right? Would I be able to develop some of these skills without them? You know, like running marathons, like being where I am and having the ability to communicate with you, to like help you with your codependency, having the emotional connections with other on such a deeper level, you know? So I kind of feel like in some ways I look at life as a whole, right? It's like, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? And in my experience, it's everything from feeling all the pleasures, smell, taste, you know, experience all the good, but also I think also the pain, right? Pain is the essential part of life. Struggle is an essential part of life, and challenges too, right? You cannot go through life without challenges, struggle, and pain. And I think even when I read some things about, you know, psychology and mental health, it's that people don't talk enough in mental health about how resilient the mind and the body is, and its ability to bounce back, right? And we are made to bounce back, and trauma is just a normal part of life. And there are people out there who will bounce back and go about this world unscathed, you know? And like I said, I don't think we should even dwell on the fact that will we ever heal, because that in some ways, your words kind of dictate your behavior and your worldview in some ways. And I kind of want to encourage people to move away from that and more about what can I get out of this on a positive side, right? What is life trying to get me to experience, right? In the depth of pain, it is really hard, right? But that's why you have people talking about their pain and how they come out of it, because in some ways you can transform like pain into power and a lot of great things for yourself.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Hylan. You came into my life like at the most convenient time. And I never believe that people come into your life like at a specific reason for a reason. And you did, but thank you. And yes, meditation actually put that out there has helped me a lot. I never believed in that bullshit. I thought meditation was like stupid, and I do it and I love it. And it's one of the things that has helped me heal as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Hylan, for coming on.
I can talk like
no, we should have another part like for you to come on for sure. You could be We Time Convo's life coach for sure.
Thank you, Hylan.
Thank you.